This video is going to be a film study preview of the Ravens' Monday Night Football trip to face the Bucs in Week 7. I'm going to focus this particular preview on the Bucs' defensive structure, particularly their coverage structure, how a lot of things flow from what they're able to do with Lavonte David still. And because of the uncertainty or questionable nature of whether Mike Evans will play or not, I'm going to push all Bucs offensive previews to Sunday/Monday. I generally like to wait until the last day of practice for the week for most teams so I get an idea of what the injury report looks like. Certainly, if Mike Evans doesn't play, that's a big factor. Nursing or dealing with a hamstring injury and I believe a knee as well. Didn't practice for 2 days, maybe 3. So we're going to push all of that content to Sunday/Monday. In terms of the Bucs defense, I did a film study on Zion McCollum, who's a rising young corner that I think has tremendous potential and plays extremely fast when he's got a read in front of him in zone, number one. Number two, really good man defender. And look, the Bucs do play a lot of man. That's Todd Bowles' reputation, but they play a ton of cover 3. And I intend to show you that on film. Right now, they're 19th in points per game allowed, and by the way, they're allowing less points per game than the Ravens' defense is. To break that down a little further, they are 12th in the NFL in rushing yards allowed, 113 per game. That is up from only allowing 93 per game in 2023, and it's 4.7 yards per carry. Now, you could say, well, Coach, they've only allowed 150 total in the last 2 weeks in the division games against the Falcons, which was an overtime loss, and then the Saints last week. They could very easily be 5-1, don't get me wrong, with Atlanta attempting and converting a 52-yard field goal as time expired to force overtime. I do think the Ravens get things done in the run game here. The run game is so effective and so diverse for the Ravens, and the Lamar Jackson element to this in the run game is something that they have not seen at all this year. I'm not saying that Todd Bowles can't handle it. It doesn't have schematic options to solve those issues, but I think that the Ravens can stretch the Bucs' run defense further from a horizontal fashion, and then Derrick Henry's just so good. I'm not assuming that the Ravens are going to run for 180, but I think you should be able to look for at minimum 130 to 150 on the ground for a Ravens offensive line. Now, offense that the offensive line is coming together from a run blocking standpoint. The Derrick Henry threat, I think the jet dive is a huge element to this game, or it's an opportunity that is there, let me put it that way, particularly to the boundary for the Ravens. So even from their rush defense, and I'm not trying to downplay it necessarily, but if you look at the first 3 games against Washington, Detroit, and Denver, they allowed 135 or more in each of those 3 games. Tampa Bay has forced 9 turnovers defensively, including 6 in the last 3 weeks. I'm just trying to give you a primer here. I think it would be fair to also point out that the Bucs have allowed 105 points in their last 4 games, 26 on the road in Denver in Week 3 when they only forced 1 turnover, and then 36 in the overtime loss to Atlanta, a game that they very easily could have won. Also only forced 1 turnover in that game. Last week they gave up 27 points to the Saints in a crazy first half. They're up 17-0 after a punt return for a touchdown, and then Baker Mayfield 2 interceptions. They still are in the lead 24-20, I think midway through the second quarter, eventually fall behind 27-20. Just a wild game that the Bucs really only led 31-27 in the first minute of the fourth quarter, which was a Zion McCollum interception, kind of really swung the momentum. I'm going to focus on their coverages and the structure of their defense and try to note 3 different things. Lavonte David against tight ends into the boundary, fascinating matchup for a lot of reasons. Number one, I watched him last year against Sam Laporta in Week 6 when Detroit went down to Tampa Bay, and David played an amazing game. He's at his best, maybe not this year, 2024. He is getting older. He's a fantastic coverage inside linebacker. Just a lot of fun to watch for me. He matched up against Laporta extremely well in that game, and really, and look, Laporta came in with an ankle injury. I think he'd been on the injury list, but nonetheless, it's worth mentioning. Number 2, Zay Flowers against their nickel. I think it's Smith, number 23. He's a rookie. Zay Flowers has been rolling. If you presume that we're going to be an 11 personnel or 12 personnel with Zay Flowers set to the field, how does Tampa Bay answer our 12 personnel? We're going to get tight ends lined up into the boundary where Lavonte David's going to be. Isaiah Likely, Mark Andrews against him will be a huge swing factor, in my opinion. Meaning Lavonte David covers people really well. The Ravens tight ends have been incredibly efficient. Two forces colliding are likely, and Andrew's going to be able to get things done with the same high percent opportunities against Lavonte David. Over there to the field, presumably where you'd have Flowers versus Smith. And look, Smith has played well. He had an interception, I think, last week against the Saints. 10 tackles against Atlanta 2 weeks ago in that Thursday night loss. 8 tackles on the road win in Detroit in week 2. I think he's a talented player. Nonetheless, if you look at their defense, I think he's the guy that we want to target more often than not. Now, it's obviously a big factor as well that Dean didn't practice at all for, I think, 2 days. So who knows exactly what the status is there of his availability. Look, do they play some man? Yeah, absolutely. This is an interception against Twins. They've brought Zion McCollum over to play man on the slot receiver. I think Shaheed. Kind of an underthrown ball, perhaps, by Rattler. This is what McCollum wants. I think he wants to be targeted. He wants the ball thrown at him. He's a playmaker. He's got 2 interceptions, 10 passes defensed so far this year, playing at a really high level. So don't get me wrong. They will play man. At times, they'll show it, meaning the corner from one side, whether it's Dean, if he plays, or McCollum from the left side, will cowboy over to the opposite side of the field, and you pretty much know what you're going to get. Keep that in mind for later on as I get to the Lavonte David section of this preview. A ton of cover 3. I actually started laughing watching the last 3 weeks film, like, oh, cover 3 again. But it's a different version, and so I don't mean to minimize it at all. In fact, I think it's brilliant. And like, this is a lot of stuff that Mike McDonald did, getting to different versions of a cover 3, but creating a 4-man rush such that I would call it a safe blitz. You're getting an inside linebacker blitz from the boundary. He kind of gets clogged up here. The outside linebacker DN to the field, dropping to the hash, and then the other inside linebacker taking over the pass drop of the blitzing inside linebacker. 4 underneath droppers, 3 deep coverage, sound. It's been played for decades, obviously, but having multiple versions of it, it gives the quarterback something to process or read post-snap. But you, as a defense, obviously you know the coverage or play, number one. Number two, it's a safe structure and a safe reaction for the corners and the free safeties. I think it's a brilliant thing. And look, like as I said before, Mike McDonald played multiple versions of cover 3, and it gave quarterbacks fits, along with all of the other things that we did in bringing blitz pressure from multiple locations. Against the Lions, played an insane amount of cover 3, particularly in the second half. Now, look, the Lions got down there inside the 25-yard line like 7 times, and I think only scored once. So there's a lot to say about that game. I'm certainly not trying to paint it as, oh, Detroit should have won. They had opportunities to score a lot more points than they did. The Bucs were very sound defensively, number one. Number two, physical in coverage, meaning they were collisioning receivers. You get an example of it down here at the bottom side of the screen. The nickel defender is collisioning or pushing number one out. Oftentimes when they're walling out receivers on the hash, they're collisioning those guys and making those routes expand a little bit. Not necessarily what happened here, but you can see the cover 3 nature of this defense. Why do I bring this up so much? Lamar Jackson, prior to Todd Monken's arrival, used to tear up cover 3. Greg Roman, one of the things that he did extremely well was design pass concepts against cover 3. Other coverages, 2 high safety structures, I think gave us more issues. Again, this is pre-Todd Monken's arrival in 2023. I think that the Bucs are a very talented and tough defense. I think they're very well coached, and they're playing well. They could easily be 5-1. If they don't force turnovers against this Ravens offense, I think that Baltimore can go down there and score a lot of points. I understand if Bucs fans are listening and want to provide a retort to that in the comment section, no problem, I understand. I do think they're a really good football team. I think they're going to win a lot of games. I think the particular matchup of going against a quarterback like Lamar Jackson, who's playing extremely well, and has always executed against cover 3 with a high level of efficiency, along with the running back that we have back there, really makes this Ravens offense difficult to defend for anybody. So Bucs fans shouldn't take it as an offense that I'm predicting or saying that the Ravens have a chance to go in there and score 28, 30, 33 points once again. Even down in the red zone, the low red zone, you still get basically versions of cover 3 against Jared Goff, an unathletic quarterback, obviously, compared to Lamar Jackson. And this is where I want to kind of start talking about Lavonte David a little bit. He will be lined up to the boundary, and oftentimes he's responsible for covering tight ends. And I believe a lot of things flow from there in terms of my understanding of it and how I'm going to try to explain it. So let's presume for a moment that he's going to play man. He's located over to the boundary where the tight end is normally to put him in better position to do so. Got it. Also, this particular version of cover 3 is one that I'm a huge fan of. Dropping the field side safety down on the hash, essentially an inside linebacker drop, leaving an inside linebacker on the other hash, pushing Lavonte David out into the flats. In this case, it happens to be a speed out to Jameson Williams, kind of taking advantage of that leverage, meaning David was lined up further to the inside to make it look like he was going to play man on the tight end. So that speed out there, whether the Lions should have been running those concepts in this situation is a topic for another day. This is an example of them getting down inside the 10 and then not scoring with, I believe, inside of 2 minutes left in the game. A screen pass that the Bucs react to. Really nice play. I think it's Dennis, number 8, or maybe number 9. Number 8, yep, playing inside linebacker. But if you look at what we've got before they react to the screen, 4 underneath defenders, with this being the field side safety dropping down. Corner, free safety, corner, essentially the same exact coverage they showed on the previous snap. Really gave Jared Goff problems. His ability to get through, he's known for making quick decisions post-snap, understanding the coverage based on what he's seeing, and the Bucs gave him a tremendous difficulty throughout that game, but particularly in the second half. The very next play, 4th and 8, again, we're talking about a minute left in the game. Yes, the back of the nickel defender is turned to the quarterback, but he is pushing with this out route by Jameson Williams. If you accept what I'm saying here, that you've essentially got another version of cover 3, it would go under a different name down in the red zone or down that close to the goal line, for me, at least based on my experience. But structurally, Bowles is playing a lot of cover 3. The Ravens, if they're in known passing situations, long yards to gain, yeah, the cover 3 sets up nicely for the Bucs in one regard. It's not man-free. If they force Lamar to scramble, they have zone defenders who are able to respond. I'm not saying they're just going to shut down the scrambles by Lamar, but they would be able to respond better since their back is not turned, covering someone in a man relationship. Hopefully I said that in a way that makes sense. I'm actually a big cover 3 guy, so don't think that I'm saying that cover 3 is so easily manipulated or handled. Later on in the game, 33 seconds left, I think you've got another version of it here again, with the field side safety dropping down to the hash. Again, the Lions made it down inside the 25 often against this Bucs defense. They weren't able to generate more touchdowns or more points. Finally, a couple of illustrations of cover 3 against the Falcons and or the Saints. It's a 3rd and 3. It's going to be a short completion to London down into the boundary. This is something I could see the Ravens doing to try to force Bowles' hands in terms of showing his coverage options. So you've got Drake London in the slot down here to the boundary. 2 inside linebackers walked up to the field. It's a nickel alignment. When I say show your hand, what do I mean? Well, here's a free safety. It's a one high look. Nickel defender to the field. The other safety is walked down to the boundary. So basically the Bucs, are kind of forced to get into a one high look and show their hand a little bit quicker pre-snap than you would normally get if the tight end was into the boundary. So if you put Zay Flowers down here to the boundary as the second receiver, the slot receiver, you can, at times, I think, force them to give away some things pre-snap. But structurally, I think you're still looking at a cover 3. In this case, Kirk Cousins hits Drake London. Quick reception, 18 yards down into the boundary. They will play some man, don't get me wrong. And I think they are very handsy. Carlton Davis III played there up until this year, moving over to the Lions via trade. Known for being very physical, using his hands a lot. I'm seeing film of him this year with the Lions. Same story. Dean is another guy that likes to use his hands. So how could we get him matched up on Zay Flowers? 12 personnel, put both tight ends into the boundary, and see how the see how the Bucs match up. Do they go with their nickel defense? Or if they go with their nickel defense, then Smith, number 23, is going to be the nickel up here, lined up on Zay Flowers. I think that's a matchup that is in our favor. Even though Smith is a rookie and we don't necessarily know who he is yet, he's only played 6 games at this point. That Zay Flowers, the way he's running routes, the way he's getting across the field, to me is a matchup we would like to manipulate. The other way to do it, if they stay in their base defense, they being the Bucs against 12 personnel, and they cowboy Dean over here, I think that's a matchup that is huge for the Ravens. And from an agility and a speed standpoint, if Dean can get his hands on Flowers from the line of scrimmage, then great. I could see the Ravens moving Zay Flowers before the snap, this type of motion, such that Dean can't be here to get his hands on him. And I think that is a matchup that provides the Ravens a big edge in terms of getting Zay Flowers the football with the ability to make someone miss. Hopefully I explained that in a way that makes sense. I'm not trying to simplify their coverages. I'm not trying to present the Bucs coverages as being simple and easy to understand for me, certainly, or for the Ravens. I'm trying to make it easy for you to understand what you might see pre-snap and then post-snap. I feel like the broadcast view isn't going to give us this, obviously the all-22, but oftentimes we do get to see how they're matching up, whether they have a corner running with someone, kind of like I was just alluding to. In this case, it happens to be the nickel defender going from the field into the boundary. Now, interestingly, the Bucs do have, out of 11 personnel, now they've moved David to the side of the tight end. Again, this is week 2 against the Lions. 11 personnel motioning across, nickel defender going with him, and it's Khalif Raymond who was able to get free multiple times in that game on kind of like his deeper out, making it look like a wheel. Timing throw from Goff, 18 yards. Oftentimes you'll get, when you get 3 receivers to the field, you can see the ball on the left hash, and I'll actually show a little bit of 2023 film in a moment. So ball on the left hash and the receivers to the field, they'll leave Lavonte David backside, basically in the outside alignment, because he's going to guard the tight end man-to-man. The Bucs have difficulty matching up with this bunch here on this particular play. Raymond gets free again on out concept against Smith. Smith and Dean essentially switch it. I think there's opportunities for the Ravens to get things done against Smith to the field out of 11 personnel or out of 12 personnel if the Bucs keep their base defense on the field. I don't think that they will do that consistently, meaning keep their base defense on the field, but perhaps that's what Todd Bowles will want to do. I think that would be a mistake. I think keeping their base defense on the field against our 12 personnel grouping could get them in trouble when we go with flex formations. I did a 12 personnel video a couple of days ago. I'll try to link it up in the description for you to see it, whether you're a Ravens fan or Bucs fan, just basically showing when the Ravens go 12 personnel with Likely and Andrews, it essentially is 11 personnel. In some ways, you could even say it's 10 personnel because Likely and Andrews are the caliber of slot. They're as effective as slot receivers in the NFL. No, they're not smaller, quicker slot receivers like a Zay Flowers or like a Mooney or a Shaheed or something like that, but they are guys who can get things done in the pass game out of spread formations. Attacking the nickel defender to the field, in my opinion, is something that the Ravens should look at, particularly with out routes. He's been beat on these type of routes often. This is if this play doesn't occur, by the way, the Falcons probably are not able to force overtime on the last kick of the game. It's a 4th and 4. And I think the Bucs are playing a version of what I'll call a match coverage. Let's do it that way, where they end up basically bracketing outside receivers. So to the boundary, this concept would be Lavonte David. To the field, it would be the nickel. Basically, whatever the first to the flat is what those guys are covering. And from there, if you eliminate those receivers, the remaining receiver who doesn't push first to the flat is essentially being bracketed by the corner and the safety to that side. It's a brilliant usage, if you ask me, of their defensive structure. I think it really can only get accomplished because of how exceptional Lavonte David is in coverage, in my opinion. So you get a real nice view of it here from this angle. David matched up on the tight end, the nickel here, and then they're essentially bracketing these two guys. You can really only do it from a 2x2 formation, flex formation, which is what I just described to you a moment ago in terms of using 12 personnel with Andrews and Likely on the field and going flex or 2x2. The Ravens may be using more motion this week, in my opinion, to try to either A, sift out the different coverages that the Bucs use, number one, or number two, prevent them from using this one. Additional to that, I think this particular coverage is somewhat dangerous for the Bucs, because if you're playing or matching the first to the flat and your two safeties and two corners are running with or occupied by the deep routes, that leaves open huge areas of the field for Lamar Jackson. And I will talk about a 4 deep, 2 under coverage where they blitz 5 that I think we'll probably see more often. It's not to say that they don't show one coverage or show one look and then play a different coverage. I covered this play or talked about it in the Zion McCollum film study video on Friday. You got trips to one side, bunch really for Atlanta. They've cowboyed the corner over, so they've got McCollum, Smith, and Dean all on the same side. Again, Lavonte David backside, making it look like tight end, or a man on the tight end. But both safeties staying high in a 2 deep structure really reveals what this is. Kind of tips their hand a little bit. That is Lavonte David up there basically playing corner to the boundary from a assignment or role standpoint post-snap. Zion McCollum is running in the middle of the field. This is a Tampa 2, in case you didn't put that together already. You guys are getting part of the screen cut off. I've kind of zoomed in on my streaming computer, but it's a Tampa 2, even though it looked like pre-snap. It was certainly going to be man. It's a 3rd and 13. Kirk Cousins going up top to Mooney, who had 3 touchdowns in that game. Let's get to David a little bit more and some of the things that I thought showed you exactly how much confidence they have in him. Very similar structure defensively here to the previous play. And we're spanning over the course of a year. This is week 6, 2023. Trips to the field out of 12 personnel. The Bucs have stayed with their base defense. So Dean is matched up in here with one of the receivers. I think that's Raymond, but I could be wrong. And then that's Carlton Davis III, who's since moved on to Detroit, matched up with St. Brown. To the outside, I think it's Whitehead, I believe, or maybe Winfield, matched up with the outside tight end. And down here to the boundary, playing straight man on Laporta with Lavonte David. It's a win for Laporta, but on the day, he was like 4 catches for 11 targets. And the way that they matched it, Devin White, who of course is no longer with the team, on the running back, David on the tight end. If the Ravens go 12 personnel and the Bucs stay in their base defense, I think that sets up the Ravens' opportunities for 2-by-2 formations with Likely and Andrews in the slot to both sides, and or 3-by-1 formations with the tight end set backside. And the Bucs, will essentially be forced to declare their coverage, kind of like they've shown right on that particular play right there. Same play, end zone angle, just so you can see what they're expecting or what they're asking of Lavonte David. It looks like, if you were going to say it's man, it looks like this is what you've got right now. But the way the routes work themselves out, White and David have switched responsibilities. It's a cool route concept. Don't get me wrong. I think David played spectacular in that game. The first play that I'm showing you from that week doesn't necessarily illustrate that point. This one will. Later on in the game, 3rd down, in terms of what they're asking him to do, David playing man on the tight end up to the top side, whether that's Andrews or Likely. Even though I think David is a spectacular coverage linebacker and has been for years, this works out in our favor. It's a conversion for Laporta. In fact, like I said, one of his, I think, 4 catches on the day out of 11 targets. Flowers, Andrews, Likely have opportunities here to have, I don't know if I want to say big days, but they have opportunities to make plays in timely moments, particularly 3rd downs, when the Bucs tend to kind of show their coverage a little bit more. We're going to move on to what I believe to be one of their first to flat coverages, like I briefly talked about a moment ago. Again, you have David lined up over Laporta into the boundary. Watch the boundary side corner, in this case it's Dean, and how he matches up with the vertical route by St. Brown. It ends up being a deep out, and David essentially plays the first to the flats, which in this case is Sam Laporta. So same structure as I described a couple of plays ago. The safety corner to that side, basically bracketing the receiver. David will take the first to the flats in the case of Laporta, same situation up here, although you do have the running back releasing to the side, so a little bit more of an onus in coverage put on the linebacker. If they play this version of their match coverage, I think this gives Lamar the opportunity to really hurt them with his legs, especially in situations where we're running deeper routes with the outside receiver to occupy this corner and this safety. Hopefully I said that in a way that makes sense. It's not really the way that it's working out up to the top side of the screen on this particular snap. Number one, they're playing against Jared Goff. Number two, the routes really didn't push that far down the field. Another iteration of it, this one results into a sack, and I think also gives a really clear look into what I'm talking about. Ball's on the right hash. Nickel defender to the field. You're going to get an out route down here by London that's matched by the nickel. Looks like maybe London's going to try to bring this route back in. David matching Pitts into the boundary. And look at the alignment of these guys, particularly the safeties, with their backs to the middle of the field. So basically shutting off any post or in-breaking route by the deeper receiver because the safety could handle it. It's a coverage that I think we'll see. Four-man blitz and matching routes underneath. Same concept here. Again, back to that Detroit game, except it's switched. Laporta is running a vertical release. He could break in. He could go vertical, could go on and out. And then on the inside breaking route from St. Brown, basically an under concept, David is passing that off. So it essentially looks like zone here, but I think it's really just a match coverage based on the release of two with the corner and the safety trying to eliminate one or whoever ends up being the vertical threat. Hopefully I'm explaining this in a way that makes sense. You got slightly different route configuration up here, number one. Number two, you have the running back pushing to the field. I wonder about the Ravens screens against this particular coverage and or cover three. Not that I'm saying the Bucs are susceptible to screens, but with how often those guys do have themselves oriented to two, the first player pushing to the flats, it makes me wonder if the Ravens screen game, which has been tremendously effective this year, isn't going to have an opportunity to have an impact again. Oh, by the way, film from last year, ball on the right hash, field side safety pushing down. Essentially, if you believe what I'm saying, I think you've got another version of cover three where basically Davis is playing man on the backside tight end. In this case, it's Laporta with David pushing to the flats. Here's your four under, three deep guys. A lot of cover three. So a couple of really cool coverage iterations or variations, if you ask me. I think the Bucs defense plays really fast and very physical because they do kind of, in some ways, keep things simple. Example of a slightly different iteration of the match coverage, except this one's two under, so it's going to create a five-man rush. I would guess this is what we'll see a little bit more of. So one of the inside linebackers blitzing and the nickel defender, again, this is film from last year, dropping out to a two under delineation. I think these guys still have the same role essentially, except now there's no ability to match necessarily the running back. The running back theoretically should be involved in the pass pro since it's a five-man blitz. It's all just a trade-off. I think the coverage of the Bucs have basically multiple versions of cover three, but let's just call it for purposes of this video, one coverage, cover three. The match coverage where they're basically bracketing the deeper concepts. Let's call that a second coverage. You have another iteration of it that I just showed you there where it's a five-man blitz. So four deep, two under is how I'll describe it. And then some man stuff. I think the Ravens have an opportunity if they've been able to figure out where and when the Bucs are playing these coverages. I can't give you that information. I'm not able to track every single coverage snap, number one, and then number two, map it to a field diagram and say, oh, 2nd and 8 from our -30, ball on the right hash, they're playing this particular coverage against 11 personnel. That's the type of data that the Ravens would have if they were able to really get a beat on what Todd Bowles is doing, because he is the defensive play caller, to my knowledge. Then I think the Ravens are going to have opportunities to get their offense going against this Bucs defense, which is still a formidable opponent. In my opinion, there's plays to be made in the run game and the pass game. I'll try to get out on Sunday morning a run game preview, how the Bucs stop the run, what the Ravens can get accomplished with their run game that at this point is looks like it could end up being historic once again. And the difference this season in 2024 is Lamar Jackson is not the leading rusher. We now have the top running back in the NFL in terms of a production standpoint, in terms of a reputation, and actually from a historical standpoint. Appreciate you guys' time, man. This was perhaps a less organized video than usual, trying to focus on the Bucs coverage structures, what you might see. I don't really even necessarily think on the broadcast angle all the time you can see the whole field. I don't know about you. Sometimes pre-snap, I'm just like, I'm a little upset or angry at the broadcast because I want them to show the field view where I can see as much pre-snap as possible. And like they're showing the quarterback's face, or they're showing a close-up of a coach on the sideline, and the play is about to be snapped. It bothers me a little bit, I'll be honest with you, but I'm probably a little bit too fired up about getting as much pre-snap information as possible when I'm not involved with the game in any way whatsoever. I appreciate you guys' time, man. If you enjoyed this video, let me know in the comments section, number one. Number two, if you think other Ravens fans, or Bucs fans for that matter, would appreciate this film study review, an attempt to understand their coverage structures, then please consider grabbing a link to this video, sharing it out on social media to help this content get more reach.